But I'm curious, like, why do you think so many of these stories, like Lord of the Rings and different stuff, like resonate with you and so many people?
Well, I know for me, these stories, like these real potent stories, for lack of a better word, I think they like really speak to a lot of themes that we all have in our lives that I don't know, we can't always articulate, but it's there. Like just that, I'm just looking at, I got a picture of an art piece of Gandalf like coming into the Shire, and there's no name on that art piece. I just found it online, but I call it the call to adventure. And like I think it's such an interesting thing because we watch the feeling you get when you watch a hero in action, and that could be Lord of the Rings or Luke Skywalker or any of the Marvel heroes. Like when you get that feeling of admiration, that doesn't exactly mean that you're going to feel that way if you become a hero, but it does point you to, because you admire that person, it points you to where you should be focusing. And so like if you look at like the Lord of the Rings, okay, Frodo, like lots of respect for him. Obviously, he's a fictional character, right? But lots of respect for him and his character and what he was able to do. Would I want to walk in my bare feet for like 3 years carrying this ring that gets heavier and heavier every step I take and eating lembas bread and with this little golem creature? Man, that'd be very uncomfortable. It'd be very unpleasant. But again, the hero's journey is not always a pleasant one. A lot of times, it's something that's unpleasant, that's difficult, and that's how you mature, and that's how you grow up. And I really believe that people ultimately want to grow up because I think people ultimately want to have meaning, and I think you do that by growing up and by taking on responsibility. And I think these stories, really, a lot of these stories that people fall in love with, it's like a call to adventure. It's a call to grow up, to mature, to become more virtuous, to become more wise. Even though we can't articulate it, it kind of speaks to us on a deeper level.
It's tough to connect it, like for me, directly with our modern lives. In the way you think about these things, and I'm a fan of Joseph Campbell, the especially the PBS series, which is probably like a few decades old at least. Um, and I think it's 6 episodes, called The Power of Myth. I may watch it like once a year or something. Definitely every couple of years. Like I'm watching it. I just started watching it again. I'm only on episode 2. But it's fascinating. Like he's talking about all sorts of different religious traditions and like these repeating stories, this like call to adventure. Um but you see it in like Star Wars. Yeah, yes, it's that exact hero's journey, like Lord of the Rings. And like some of the examples like you're talking about, like walking barefoot for 3 years and stuff like that. Where like most of us in modern life, like you think of like cubicle life with like fluorescent, but it still does exist. It's just it's much different. Like I don't know. I'm curious if there's anything that comes up on like connecting it, because you're into. I mean, I've heard you reference Lord of the Rings a number of times on your podcast. You're very familiar with it. Like you're really into it.
Yeah, I'd say I'll actually reference The Hobbit because this one's pretty fresh in my mind. But The Hobbit is basically a story of growing up. Bilbo, the story starts and he's basically a child who's very materialistic, and a lot of the hobbits are materialistic, and so there's that element of it. Now, what's interesting is that for him to grow up, he has to go on an adventure to more or less slay a dragon, right? And now the dragon represents the devil in Christianity. But what the dwarves, what they feel when they get into to the dragon, they're trying to steal their treasure back from the dragon. There's this thing they call the dragon sickness, and really that's just nerd talk for materialism.
Mm.
And so one of the things that's really evident in our faces today is just how materialistic all of us are. Like Bilbo starts the journey and he forgot his handkerchief. And he's so attached to the comforts of his home that he's like, no, we got to turn this journey around. We got to go home because I forgot my handkerchief, right? And like how many of the things that we have in our day-to-day lives that we just cling to, that we're so attached to. And so really that journey of like virtue and wisdom and growing up in that adventure, that really is also a journey of finding out for yourself what is actually valuable in life. And it's not material possessions. And so I think like that's a very easy one right off the bat. Most people can't even get away from their cell phones for any amount of time. Most people can't even turn it on do not disturb while they work. Like we're so attached. And then you talk about the vehicles we drive, and just the list goes on and on and on. We're so materialistic today, but and I think again, just to reiterate that last point, I think growing up is detaching ourselves from that. And I think we talk a lot about that in Stoicism, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I pulled a few passages from Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And the first one is the agony of breaking through personal limitations is the agony of spiritual growth. Art, literature, myth, and cult, philosophy, and aesthetic disciplines are instruments to help the individual past his limiting horizons into spheres of ever expanding realization. As he crosses threshold after threshold, conquering dragon after dragon, the stature of the divinity that he summons to his highest wish increases until it subsumes the cosmos. Finally, the mind breaks bounding sphere of the cosmos to a realization transcending all experience of form, all symbolizations, all divinities, a realization of the ineluctable void. Is that how you say that? The ineluctable void.
I've never seen that word before in my life.
Okay, I gotta use Google here.
Should probably look that one up.
Oh,
Man, there's a
nice,
lot of depth to that.
nice. Yeah, unable to be resisted. Nice.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. A realization of the ineluctable or unable to be resisted void. So it's good stuff. What comes up around that passage?
So there's a lot of depth there. I did recognize the conquering dragon after dragon, which I thought was was interesting. We just spoke about the Hobbit. That the first line, I think that is what hits me the most. He says the agony of breaking through personal limitations is the agony of spiritual growth. You know, you wouldn't often associate spiritual growth with agony, but like a lot of times it is, and you have to be careful what you mean by that word. I think by agony, he's really referring to what you and I might term unpleasantness, like not necessarily existential suffering. But yeah, you know, it reminds me of something Seneca. I just recently read in Seneca's work where he says that to Lucilius, he says, as you I'm paraphrasing, but as you kind of go through that spiritual growth journey, like it might not be fun. It's probably not going to be fun most of the time, but when you arrive to somewhere where I am right now, meaning Seneca, it's pretty good. Like I'm pretty content and I'm pretty happy and I'm pretty satisfied. And I don't think it's a binary thing. I think it's like a gradual thing, but you know, you like I can certainly imagine like in my younger days, I was quite miserable compared to what I am now. And so you could even think about it like that, like just looking back at who you used to be, like you have to kind of get through that, for lack of a better word, agony in order to ultimately become someone that's in less agony.
Yeah. Um, like as I was talking about in the beginning though, like kind of how does this connect to modern life? Um, reading that passage, or like spiritual path, like philosophical path, um, it is like a call to adventure in a way. Like it is like as difficult as you want it to be. Like it's literally beyond your capability. Like, yeah, I would almost say like regardless of where you are on the path, like the thing of like the sage that has it all figured out and every, like mission accomplished thing kind of doesn't exist. Most people would say or suggest, but we don't always think about things like like that. Like sometimes I know we chat all the time and talk about things, and maybe like reoccurring topics come up. But even the things sometimes I think of, say you have a job that is not filled with excitement. Maybe there's some like mundane aspects of it. But when you think about like you're in a relationship, you have a spouse, or you're like a parent, or like whatever it is, like you're part of a family, obviously a community, like it's so difficult. Like it's literally the same type of thing. It's like it's so challenging. Like if you actually, what am I trying to say? Like say in the way of like a role model, like who, find yourself a Socrates. Like pick the area, whatever it may be, a parent, this and that. Like find a story that inspires you, like fictional or nonfiction. Like find someone you look up to and try to follow that path, like try to embody those particular lessons. And it's like unbelievably challenging in a good way. Like it can be like a meaningful thing. Like Campbell talks about this thing of, it's not so much meaning, it's like we want the experience of meaning. We want like embodied meaning. We want to walk it. Um, so yeah, it's just kind of it's not as easy to like connect it in a way, like for me, until you kind of got to put some things in place to like find the adventure, to be able to answer the call.
Yeah, I would say a good indication, a good input is actually the what you're reluctant to do, like the things that you're
Mm,
avoiding. Because like you make a good point, this whole adventure thing, really, I was trying to do the math in my head, but it's too complicated. I don't know how long The Lord of the Rings lasted. Let's say the whole story lasted 10 years. You can watch the movies in like less than half a day. You're not seeing 99% of the adventure. And so most of the this is why we can watch a movie and get so inspired and so motivated. But then we get to our lives and we're like, oh my God, right? Because you're looking at like, no. The adventure is not watching the army of Rohan charge and the music going. No. The journey is Frodo takes a step from this sharp rock to that sharp rock. And then, he's looking for a place to use the bathroom later. Like that's the actual adventure, and it's uncomfortable. And so a reoccurring theme in these stories, you look at The Hobbit, you look at Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, or Luke Skywalker, there's a reluctance for them to go on that journey. They're avoiding it because it's uncomfortable. And so in your day-to-day life, I'm telling you, man, I could list probably half a dozen things just off the top of my head, things that I'm avoiding, right? I try and avoid the gym every night. I always go, but in my head, I'm looking for a reason not to go. Difficult conversations with people that you care about, that you got to have, that are difficult to have. Conversations with your kids, someone at work that you might have to let them know that they're not really doing their job properly or something. Like there's a million things that we're avoiding. And that's really where the adventure is on a day-to-day basis. And if you do that every day, you can zoom out after 5-10 years You can look back. I look back on my life over the last 5 years. Man, it was an adventure. But every
Mm.
single day was a choice. Either I'm going to go on this adventure or not. And I didn't always say yes to that, by the way, because I'm a human being. But overall, if you get that equation right, and if you choose the right path, you look back and you think, well, damn, like look at that adventure I was on. Even though every day it's okay, am I gonna do this thing I'm avoiding, or am I not?
Yeah. Um, you know that on In Search of Wisdom, I asked like the what is wisdom question to wrap up the conversation, and a shout out to a previous guest, Mark Matusik, who may have given like the shortest response to that question to date. Like be honest with yourself. It's like on top of the absolutely there's things that we're like avoiding, and there's absolutely another half a dozen things that we're not quite being like honest with ourselves about, or and maybe that connects in some sort of way. It's like avoiding um is like, say, I don't know, sometimes I think in the way of like even like wrestling with a particular like question. It's like by avoiding like the question that I know is important, that I know, you know, it's like because I'm avoiding, I'm not being honest with myself. I'm not like authentically walking like this kind of path that is before me, you know? Um it's like an interesting thing, but it's super difficult in a way, and it but it gets tricky though. Like how do you know if you're being honest with yourself?